Good evening. Today we're going to be doing a tune in the style of the most genius Australian wizard warlock man to ever walk this earth. And it is Pendulum.
But I just wanna play it right. We're gonna get there tonight.
And there we have it. Let's run it from the top.
It's been so long, I've been out of my body with you. I feel alone, feel at home, feel like nothing is true. She took me to a place where my senses gave way. Turning round, shutting down what the people say. Climbing up, killing time, let them give you some. Take my hand and let it come, let it come, let it take it back when she knows that you're doing it right. Everybody else knows what they're taking tonight. But I just wanna play it right. We're gonna get there tonight.
All right, let's get into it. So before we start, there's a few stylistic things that I think to keep in mind that Pendulum are sort of renowned for in their sound. They're pretty much heavy metal mixed with drum and bass. So there's a lot of guitars in there, a lot of distorted guitars, and there's lots of live drums. So the tops, especially the cymbals, are very live sounding. And quite often you can hear like little layers of live snares in their drums. So it's a nice blend of organic instruments and digital instruments. So we've tried to do a similar thing here. So we're starting off with this bass, which is sort of sounding like a guitar, but it's a digital one at that. So we're just hanging on the root note, so the A sharp or the B flat.
It's been so long, I've been out of.
So this is just a super simple patch I made. 2 saw waves, unison 1 on the first oscillator, unison 2 on the second oscillator, and then we have a load of effects. So we've got some hyperdimension, some distortion that's cranked right up, a little bit of chorus, a lot of compression, a lot of EQ, a little bit of a filter, and that reverb isn't doing anything. And to make it a little bit more interesting, I am automating this macro, which is affecting the decay. So if we see this automation here, so it gives it a bit of movement. So without that, it's just straight dun 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 dun. But with that automation, it sort of opens up a little bit. Dun 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 dun. So it gives it a much more human feel. And then we've got a little bit of processing on there, some EQ, saturation, a bit of limiting, a bit of EQ. And then a little bit of ambience. And I know a lot of people won't be able to play guitar, so I've tried to do this in a way where you can just take it from samples, so we can see how you can find a guitar sample like this. And then throughout that, we've changed the melody as the song goes on, so we'll come to that. So in our intro, this guitar and our bass are both just hanging on that A sharp.
She took me to a place where my senses gave way. Turning round.
And then we come in with our drums, so we're not going straight in to that drum and bass pattern. We're doing a half-time pattern. So the snare is half the time that it would be in our drum and bass pattern. So if we listen to the typical drum and bass pattern, the kick and snare would sound like this. But in this section, we're doing it like this. So the snare in this intro is playing half the time. And then I've put in this little live top loop. So we really get that live feel from this loop, and the hats especially are creating a lot of humanized feel to these drums.
It's when my senses gave way, turning round, shutting down what the people say, climbing up, killing time, let them give you some, take my hand and let it come, let it come, let it.
And then when we go into this next section, I try to do a sort of drum feel that is, again, reminiscent of how a real drummer would play. So we've got a few elements that are contributing to this drum feel. One is the kick. So the kick pattern is pretty steady up until this point, so it's very similar. And then when we get into this next section, we're just increasing the hits of the kick pattern. And at the same time, we've got a few toms in there. And then a couple of cymbals in there as well. And then we come to this pretty classic pendulum drum beat. So with the drum beat, our snare is down here and our kick is up here. So our snare is on this 17 and then 17.23 and then 17.4. And then that is just carrying on that same rhythm. And then our kick is on the 17.13, the 17.2, the 17.3, and then 17.33, and then that just carries on as well. And with the kick, I've tried to not make them so rigid and so quantized, so they're a little bit off grid, some of them here, so I've just changed it to help it give it a little bit more of a human feel to it. And then we've added this little ghost note, again, something I feel like a real human would play, that t-t-t, and similar to what we've done with the kick, that's slightly off grid, and then the velocity's down a little bit as well, just to make it feel a little bit more human. And to add to the live sound of the drums, I've just taken the snare from this sample that we had in here, and I've just layered that on top of our sample snare. Just makes it feel a little bit more human. And then with our tops, we have a crash that's doing the same rhythm as the snare. And then we have a couple of top loops on there. So we're using this sample for the crashes, and then we have this live hat, and then a bit of a typical drum and bass top loop. Super crunchy and really trashy tops. So again, that really helps to give it that sort of live feel. So all the drums together. And then we come to our basses in this section. So we're doing a descending bass pattern. So we're going from the A sharp to the G sharp to the F sharp to the D sharp. And again, very simple, 2 saw waves, both unisons super high. So we've got 14 on this one, 11 on this one, 1 2 octaves down, 1 octave down. And then we've got some processing on there. So we've got some distortion, some compression, a tiny bit of reverb with a little bit of a noise on there and a bit of a filter. And we're just taking the high end out of that as well, because I felt like it was clashing a little bit with the top end of the drums. So I didn't want there to be too much of that high energy sort of fighting with each other. And I've done a low cut at 80 hertz, and then underneath that we've just got a sub, which is just the sub oscillator in Serum. And then we've got a few little bits of ear candy on top of that. We have this sustain wobble type sound. Just 2 basic CJWs, 1 fine-tuned up, both at 5 unison. And then in our matrix, we've got LFO1 affecting the D tune just slightly. So this is the shape of our LFO1 set to trigger. And then we're affecting that with the filter cutoff as well. So you can see this little notch goes up and down as that note is being played. Just gives a little bit of movement to that sound. And then our LFO2 is affecting the master tune, which gives it that wobble in the sound. So if that's set to 0, it's just a static straight note. And then we just put that up by 3. You can hear the pitch is just wobbling slightly. So that's set at 1/16, and that gives it a real nice movement to that sound. And then we've just got this little melody. which are doing the fifths of the bass. So it's effectively playing a power chord. So all of our distorted guitars are playing something called a power chord, which is the root note, the fifth, and then the octave above that. And we're just emulating that melodically with this lead here and the basses. And on top of that, this same guitar sample that we used in the intro, I've just cut it up and changed the pitch. So we're just following that bass. And then we have another sample doing exactly the same thing.
Take it back when she knows that you're doing it right. 'Cause everybody else knows what they're taking tonight. But I just wanna play it right.
And then in this second section, we come back to a more typical drum and bass pattern. We've still got some of the same tops, but we're just introducing a couple of different ones. So we're introducing the rhythm of which we didn't have previously. And then our bass slightly changes, so we're still doing the same notes, but so this was it previously, it was just doing a bar each, and then we've just slightly changed the rhythm of those bass notes. And then we're introducing this organ as well, which is very similar to the original, and I love the chords in that original, so I've just used those exact same notes. So it really elevates into this next section. We have our chords that are coming in for the first time, so we get a nice melodic difference between this section here and then this section here as well.
I just wanna play it right. We're gonna get there tonight.
And then again, to get into this next section, we are using our kick and our snare to create a little bit of a drum fill. So very simple, but the kind of thing that I imagine a real drummer would play. And super effective, because you don't get that same rhythm happening twice without any variation into that next section. So without that little drum fill.
We're gonna get there tonight.
And with. So we're sort of upping the energy for the drums and informing the listener's ear that there is another section that's about to come in. And so with this next section, the main thing that comes in is this lead. This is the exact same lead that we used earlier on, that basic CJW. Our chords are slightly changing. So previously we were going from the 1 to the 7 to the 6 to the 4. But in this section, we're starting on the 6, going up to the 7, and then finishing on the 1, and then doing that same thing again. So having a difference in the starting note in this phrase gives this whole second section of the drop a nice sort of melodic change. So we just listen to the synths and the drums together, and we can just follow what we're doing melodically with this bass. So these are the root notes of our chords. We've been starting on this A for the whole of the song. We've been doing this descending pattern, and then for the first time we're changing it up and starting our phrase on this F sharp, and then going to the G sharp to the A sharp. So we get a really different vibe melodically with this whole second section, and it just feels a little bit more emotional to me. So it was much easier to write this lead over it, whereas before I tried with the same chord pattern that we had in this first section and it didn't quite work. So when you change the chords in a different section, it sort of opens up a different way that you can potentially write melodies. So I think if you're struggling to write melodies, changing the chord structure behind it is something that can really open your ears up to something else and a different way of writing a melody. So this is our melody. We're going from the root and doing the same descending pattern that we do with the bass, but this time with the lead. So it's ever so slightly different, but it's following that same sort of harmonic pattern. So we're doing something interesting where our bass has been doing this pattern, and this time our lead is doing the pattern, but with a different harmonic structure behind it with different chords. It's a really interesting way of introducing a melody that is already familiar to the listener's ears, but is just framed in a sort of different way. And one thing that's interesting about this melody, I feel it's easy to feel like you have to start your melody on the 1. And I can fall into this trap a lot. And with this song, it fell into place much easier once I'd started the melody before the 1. So if our 1 is here, we've got this first bit of the descending melody is happening before that 1. So it's definitely something I'd recommend if you're struggling to write a melody, to try and come out of the habit of starting on the 1. You can either start a bit further in, so you could start from here, or you start from before the 1. It's a good thing to have in your mind if you are ever stuck, to just find different avenues and different ways for that melody to first come in. Because on the 1 is actually the most obvious thing to do, but it can be really effective to start it at a different point. And then in this section, we've just got a few little synths as ear candy. So that's just doing its own little melody. You don't really hear it that clearly, but it's just adding a little bit of rhythm and a little bit of a sort of counter melody as well. And there we have it. Pendulum are probably one of the first drum and bass acts that I ever fell in love with. And I was a little metal kid when I grew up. I had long black hair that I straightened. So Pendulum was the perfect avenue to get into drum and bass because they are effectively a metal band. So they're very unique sounding, and by taking inspiration from them, there are some really interesting ways that you can go about your production, especially in terms of the live elements being the tops of the drums and the guitars. So I definitely recommend keeping things interesting by putting as many live elements as you possibly can. So I do hope this has helped. Thank you for watching, and love to your mothers.